one of the biggest pieces of research you've been working on recently is around a practice which you've called work discussion, and it's thinking about how leaders, managers, head teachers can provide the right sort of support and structures for staff who are doing very emotional and complex and tricky work, which requires thousands of decisions every day to be made. I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about work discussion.
Well, I completely agree with you, Julian. You know, practitioners, you know, are making enormous numbers of decisions each day. You know, it's physically demanding work. It's been well recognised that it's intellectually demanding work. I don't think it's been very well recognised how emotionally demanding it is. Very small children manage their emotions very often by making somebody else feel them. You know, it's not always easy to put emotions into words, but you can make a sensitive, responsive key person very stirred up by your upset or your anger. So there's, alongside the physical and intellectual work, there's a lot of emotional work to do. But we don't have a tradition really of being able to talk about that emotional work as really skilled, important work. And work discussion is about being able to talk about those daily relationships that are happening moment by moment throughout the day, with attention to emotion. It's not just about emotion, but it certainly includes emotion, and being able to express the kinds of emotions that are stirred up in you by children, and that help you think about what the child's emotions might be. And if in the work discussion session, there can be a kind of an atmosphere where it is okay to talk about those emotions in the context of that particular relationship with a particular child and family, then it's much more likely that that emotional work will be managed better in the day-to-day practice than if there's a kind of pretense by practitioners that there aren't really any emotions and all the work is very objective and you know, managed very straightforwardly. It's not. It's such, you know, the relationships are complicated, and some children do have a wonderful capacity to get under the skin of adults, and that needs thinking about.
Yeah. And just to give people a picture of what work discussion actually is, it's really related to the requirement in the EYFS statutory framework for supervision. But you have taken a much wider view of supervision, because supervision sounds a bit like the early years lead or the head teacher kind of checking up that you're doing the things you're meant to be doing. Whereas a weekly or fortnightly or monthly work discussion group would be very much a space, either in a group or in a one-to-one scenario, where a key person really could explore some of the emotional impact and realities that they're living with day by day, and maybe talk about some of the individual children who are on their mind.
Yes, I think that's exactly it. It needs to be weekly or fortnightly to really be able to work well. It's a big commitment of time, but the evidence we have from evaluations is that it's a very well worth investment of that time from the head and senior staff to provide that space for individual practitioners in terms of helping them manage the work. It's not a question of whether you have emotions or don't have emotions in your thinking about pedagogy. The emotions are there. The choice, whether you like it or not, and need to be there. The choice is much more about, are these emotions talked about and managed in a careful way, or are they pushed underground and then they're operating in a way that is not really accountable and thought about. And then they're much more difficult for the individual practitioner to deal with. If they're feeling stirred up by a child and feel this is bad, it's a sign of them not coping well as a practitioner, then they're going to try and conceal that, if that's the feeling they have from their head. That's not helpful. That's going to lead to stress and burnout in the end. The head needs to know how the staff are managing.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that duty of care that EYFS leads and heads have got to their staff, and again, more so than ever, of course, in the current climate with the pandemic, but a very eye-catching part of the research report, I think, is that the children who benefited most were the children who had the most difficulties at the beginning of the investigation. So those children that your observations showed had the greatest difficulties with their play and their learning and communication and managing their feelings were the ones that made the strongest progress of any of the children. And I thought that was a really eye-catching finding.
Yes, yes. And from the practitioner's point of view as well, you know, although it's quite a difficult thing to talk about your emotions, how much the practitioners said that they felt, that they really appreciated, although they found it very hard sometimes. And, you know, even, you know, when the work discussion group was held at the end of the day after children had gone home, and you know, very often it was the last thing practitioners really wanted to do, to stay on for another hour and a quarter. But it also felt like somebody was interested in their feelings and how they were managing the work.
Yeah. Peter, thank you so much. Busy time for us all at the moment, and it's been absolutely great to catch up with you today. Thank you so much.
Good. Very glad to help.